We often think of trauma as a huge event that happens that we remember. What if it was a little bit more complicated than that? Let's talk about it in today's episode. Welcome back. My name is Sarah. This is the Sarah Kleiner Wellness YouTube channel. I'm here with my co host, James. And I am excited to bring this episode to you with Seth Lyon. Now, you may remember his wife, Irene Lyon. We have really done a lot of episodes together about the nervous system, trauma, nervous system health. So I will link some of those in the show notes below for you guys. But Seth is actually Irene's partner in all things nervous system regulation. I really wanted to bring him on to the show to talk about some topics that really do get swept under the rug, especially in our American culture. Now, some of these things might be a little bit controversial, but I felt that it was time to start talking about these things, especially in this day and age. So I really hope that you enjoy this episode. And sorry, my little co-host here is waking from his nap. Irene and Seth are also having a Black Friday sale. If you're watching this the Wednesday that it does release, Wednesday the 23rd, that will start this Friday. There's $100 off on their 21-day nervous system reset. So I'm going to link that down in the show notes if that's something that you're interested in doing after listening to this episode. I have done all of their programs and find them immensely helpful in dealing with trauma. So again, enjoy this episode. I want to thank a couple sponsors very quickly. The first one is going to be Viva Rays. Now, I would show you the glasses, but I have my hands a little full right now. I use the Viva Rays circadian glasses to keep my circadian rhythms in order. This is absolutely essential for my mental health, especially in the winter. Artificial light at night, if you Google artificial light at night and depression study, you are going to be bombarded with information about how artificial light at night, so after sunset, can really contribute to poor mental health, along with obesity, diabetes, cancer, a host of health issues. So I trust Viva Rays. You can use my code YOGI to save 15% on those. The second sponsor is going to be Optimal Carnivore. I absolutely love their Brain Nourish product, again, for supporting my mental health. My code there is carnivore, uppercase Y, and I'm a huge fan of their organ meat complex as well as their beef liver supplement to, again, fill in any nutritional gaps that my diet might be missing. All right, I think that's enough. I hope that you enjoy today's episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today, I have a very special guest. Now, you have probably met, if you've been watching my show for a while, or you've met Irene Lyon. And today, I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with her husband, Seth. And we're going to talk about his trauma healing story and just a lot of things that I think don't really get brought out into the light. So thank you, Seth, for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much, Sarah, for having me. Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like you have a really interesting story. And some of my, I have a private membership group, and some of the members in there have done Irene's program, and you facilitate a lot of that program as well, which I've done. The nervous system, smart body, smart mind, which is excellent. Highly recommend. And you help facilitate a lot of that. So I've had a lot of people that have done that program that are like, can you get Seth on your podcast, please? We really want to hear from Seth.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I do the Q&A calls, and I manage a couple of the pages in there, and I'm quite involved with answering people's questions and stuff. So yeah. Oh, well, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just jump into your story of, trauma healing and just I just think it's so interesting, some of the things you've been through and overcome. So start wherever you feel is relevant.
Sure. Well, I think one of the most important things to highlight is, and this is something that thankfully is getting bigger coverage, like with Gabor Mate making the rounds recently with his latest book, which is all about the toxic norm. And that is essentially what I grew up steeped in, which was, from the outside, from a normal sort of perspective. I had a great childhood. Like I had everything I needed materially. I had friends. I had school. I had shelter, food, all that stuff. I was living in suburbia. Grew up in the Bay Area. I was in a split family, so my parents got divorced when I was 2, and I went back and forth between their houses, 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there. Again, that's very normal, considered normal,
Yeah.
growing up in public school system, just going through that sort of normal 80s, 90s childhood into college in the early 90s. And it's so interesting the way that these things that are perceived as normal in so many ways are really, really unhealthy for us. And I know this is something you've gotten into, just, especially more lately with screens and that sort of artificial light and all that stuff. And back then we didn't have that so much, but we still had, just the rigidity of the environment, concrete jungle, right? Like just very little access to nature or recognition that that was important. So lots of walking on just these hard surfaces, playing, falling, getting screwed, bruised and scraped up and all that stuff, which is normal, but not a lot of connection to nature in general. That wasn't understood to be valuable. And then growing up in like the school system, which is, very regimented and mechanical, and basically, the style of learning is take in, regurgitate, forget about it. And, there's not much encouragement for creative thinking, and there's all the weird social dynamics that happen. So all of those things, medical system has got some major problems with it, right? So there's things that happen and that happened to me, which we can get into in more detail later, but that were considered normal, that were extremely traumatic. For myself, one of the biggest things was being born preemie. I was born 6 weeks preemie and spent my first about month in an incubator, separated from, my mom, from my family system. So that creates a profound trauma early on, attachment wound. I often said later in life that I spent a lot of time trying to recreate that container for myself, that of isolation, because it was what was safe and also at the same time profoundly damaging. But when you're that little one, being separated like that is a real tough blow to the developing system. There's the ventral vagal system. It needs that connection with the mother, the nursing, the skin on skin contact. I mean, for different parts of the brain and nervous system that are developing. So I missed some of that. And then, my folks separating at the age of 2, there was also another big rupture, and also that's considered normal. And so, these things were happening to me, and there was no awareness in the field that like, oh, maybe this is having an effect on Seth's nervous system, right? So the effects then tend to compound. You have wound on top of wound, and none of it is getting addressed. None of it seems particularly horrific, right? I was spanked, which again is just a normalized way of saying hitting your kid, right?
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
I
was 80s, 90s kid too. So we go get the switch off the tree. You pick the one you want to get hit with.
Yeah, exactly.
It's totally normal.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So, but I wasn't horrifically abused in any way that would be right. It wouldn't be considered that or neglected or anything, right? But these experiences pile up on top of each other, and the ramifications of those impacts to the nervous system as they compound, they ended up leading, to me anyways, to have complex PTSD by the time I graduated high school. I mean, I also lost my older brother when I was 13. My brother, who was 21, died after battling cancer for a couple of years. So that was another big rupture, and also an early insight for me into the medical system and its shortcomings when it comes to dealing with internal illness, because it was the treatment that killed him, not the cancer. So, after 2 years of being poisoned by chemo and radiation, and then finally had an allergic reaction to a sort of experimental procedure, and so it was for me a big, planted some seeds of just like, maybe that's not the best system for all things, like, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, for for things like catastrophic injuries and, all sorts of stuff like that, car accident, those bacterial infection, those types of things, it can be amazing. But when it comes to things like cancers and autoimmune disorders and the kind of things that Irene and I see in our practice, primarily things that are considered emotional, mental, like depression, anxiety, but are actually physiological. And those, then spin into autoimmune disorders, chronic gut problems, right? So I experienced a bunch of that. By the time I graduated from high school, I had, chronic digestive issues, irritable bowel, going sort of back and forth between constipation, diarrhea. That was normal for me. I just thought, like, whatever, that's how it is, right? I had depression. I had social anxiety. I had addiction. So all of these things that I ended up as a result of my seemingly normal, good childhood, right? And so that, I went to college. That was a bit of a reprieve. I got to sort of discover myself a bit. And when I graduated college, I basically was just bumming around with some friends. I wasn't in a hurry to, succeed in any traditional sense. And I discovered meditation. I'd already been living a somewhat alternative lifestyle, just connected to hippie, the hippie culture, counterculture kind of thing. And then I discovered meditation. I got really into Vipassana, did a 10-day sit that was very impactful. 10 days of silence. And for me, I soaked it up. It was great. Like, for my nervous system, that was fantastic. No one's going to talk to me. I can just sit here and, like, oh, amazing, right? And had a very profound experience with it. I didn't realize till later it didn't actually heal anything, but it did awaken a lot of consciousness. I became aware of different kind of aspects of myself, ability to connect to energy, ability to sense things at sort of a finer level. So that was cool. And that really put me on what I would say the path into the woods, so to speak, where I essentially took off from mainstream society and lived for about 13 years in the woods. I lived in Hawaii for 5 years, just camping around, eating off the land, doing work trade. Met my first wife, had a child, and then lived in Oregon for about 7 years, just in a little hot springs community, living and working off grid, just not connected to the mainstream world and its stressors. I thought at the time that was just my preference, right? That's how I would live the rest of my life, because I recognized how toxic the mainstream culture was. I didn't really recognize that I was actually creating a safe bubble for myself, because I couldn't handle the mainstream world. And I mean, yes, there are a lot of real problems with it, but also, I mean, ideally one should have the resilience to meet those challenges and interface within that system. If we want to, have any sort of impact on other people's lives, help people, we kind of need to be in the world, right?
Definitely.
So that wasn't something I realized till I met Irene, and I started doing this work, and I moved to Canada and back into society, and that's when I realized, wow, how many problems I still had. Because in my safe bubble in the woods, in the alternative community, I was fine. Like, I was like sort of master of my realm. It was all good. And I didn't realize how that was very actually dependent on this rigid container of needing to be, apart. So that's what really led me to this work ultimately, and discovering the nervous system work, the trauma healing work, getting into that for myself. Irene had just finished her training when I met her, and I really resonated with the work as she was describing it. It went along with a lot of what I had already learned about scanning the body, as well as sort of shamanic approaches to healing. It went along with the kind of tracking system that you do with Vipassana, tracking sensations. That's kind of an important part of the work. But there was so much that I was missing in terms of understanding social connection, the nuance of the nervous system, how delicate it is, how to work with it. So I got fascinated by the work by doing the sessions for myself and my own healing. And then I went into the professional training. So that's the long arc from suburbia to the woods to living back in Vancouver now and working with clients and, speaking with people all over the world and, no longer having any of the symptoms that I did have. They've pretty much all resolved at this point. So it took a while.
It does. It takes time. And I feel like we have to kind of unravel a bit. I resonate with so much of what you've shared of just kind of growing up in a similar time period and the gut issues. And, when you were living in the woods, kind of more recluse away from society, did you still have the gut issues? Was that still okay?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I didn't
Yeah.
have what it managed was the anxiety. I didn't have the anxiety or the depression because I didn't have that overwhelm from being in the sort of built environment of the mainstream. So yeah, I was good emotionally, but physically I still had the same gut issues. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the biggest thing that I come across people dealing with, the majority of people who have a complaint with their health, it is their gut. And that's, that was what led me to do carnivore diet, elimination diet, which helped tremendously. But in a sense, it's kind of like that's, carnivore diet is appropriate to do for parts of the year when there's no produce and things like that growing. We're not really supposed to ancestrally eat that way, but my body couldn't handle. And I hear people, I can't handle this food, this food, this food, this food, this food. And yeah, the diet can help and provide you with a lot of relief.
Yeah.
But it's not the solution.
Yeah.
You're still not dealing with the root cause of the problem if you're just using that diet. And if you love the diet, awesome, cool, great. But still, that's a signal that maybe you want to look a little deeper at something that's going on in your body, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the gut is so sensitive. I think it gets thrown off very easily just in our toxic norm society.
Oh, yeah.
Diet does have something to do with that for sure. I mean, if you think about the crap that we grew up eating, that certainly has an effect, but even more so is understanding the connection between the autonomic nervous system, the fight flight responses, the freeze response, and how that impacts the gut, because that's what really makes it not function.
Right.
I can get into that if you want, like just a little bit more
why
detail.
not?
So, we have these survival responses. Your audience is probably pretty familiar with that by now, but these are our autonomic survival responses: fight, flight, and freeze. They're supposed to be time limited. They come on to protect us from a life threat, and then they're supposed to turn off. And what trauma is essentially is when those survival responses are initiated, but they don't turn off. Due to a variety of circumstances, they stay on underneath the surface. And so when that happens, what's going on is your energy, your life energy, is being recruited by these survival responses. And you then have much less access to other functions that you need. So for example, our gut and our digestion, the barrier keeping functions, enzyme release, all of these things are autonomic processes. So when our juice, so to speak, is being hijacked by the survival centers, there's much less energy available for those restorative rest, digest, repair processes. We need to be in a certain nervous system state, which is called the low tone dorsal vagal state, where there's like a gentle hum sort of moving through the dorsal vagal branch of the vagal nerve. So that enables this lovely rest, digest, cell repair, barrier keeping in the gut to happen. When we're in freeze, which is high tone dorsal vagal, it's like lots of energy is going to that branch saying, shut everything down. Well, that tells the digestion to stop. Don't do anything, conserve all your nutrients. Or if we're in fight flight, it's saying eliminate, 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 get rid of everything as fast as possible so we can flee. So when you have both these things on underneath the surface, which is what we see the most often with early developmental trauma, is that there's some fight, flight, and freeze both stuck on in the system. That is sending these cross signals to the digestive system. And it's also not enabling us to access the restorative function of that low tone dorsal. So it gets us every which way.
Yeah. So to say the diet is the solution
Yeah, yeah,
is not necessarily going to be a full truth, right?
that's right.
I think
I
it's
think
kind
the
of a half
diet,
truth.
yeah, the diet can bring in a stabilizing element, like,
Yes.
right, for sure, which can be super
Yeah.
helpful, making it
Yeah.
much simpler. The carnivore diet, I know, is a very good way to go. There's, paleo,
Or just
there's
eating meat. That
just,
was the one thing that
yeah,
that I
totally.
loved when I did you and Irene's program, this the Smart Body, Smart Mind. I was like, yes, because there were people in there that were like, I'm doing a vegan diet, I'm doing a vegetarian diet, and you guys actually address that and say probably not the best diet for your nervous system. So
That's
I
right.
want
Especially when we're healing
yeah.
trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because we
And yeah.
really need the fat, for one.
Yes.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
fat and the amino acids are
yeah,
essential for the brain to
yeah,
have that feeling of safety.
yes.
Um, so that's one thing that I from the beginning was like, okay, this is a good program for me because
Nice. Yeah, they're on the same page.
we're
Yeah,
on the same page here with
yeah,
the nutrition side, that you do need that healthy amount
yeah,
of fat and protein and the amino acids from the meat. So it's
yeah.
very stabilizing for the body. But if you have this level of dysfunction with your nervous system, you
Hmm.
can do, and I have met many folks that are doing a carnivore diet that are still struggling
Yeah,
with these types of issues. And so
yeah,
that's why I've always loved having Irene as a resource to point people to, and say, hey,
yeah.
this is something you may want to look a little deeper into. And then I have my people who are, have the compulsive overeating and the
Hmm.
all the feelings around food. That's another one where I'm like, I can't give you a meal plan to fix that issue.
Yeah,
There's no meal plan, there is no diet. And some people may argue with me and say, oh, they put them on the right diet and they're not going to have that urge, the addiction thing.
mm,
I think it can help parts of the brain, but there's deeper down something else that needs to be addressed within the nervous system that
that's
is
right.
also contributing to that as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of this kind of like normal trauma that I think that we normalize it in our society. My sister and
Mm,
her husband just went through, well, ex-husband now just went through divorce, and they have a 3-year-old, and all of a sudden now the 3-year-old is screaming and acting out and getting upset about things. And my sister's like, I don't get it. I don't understand why she's,
mm,
it's not making any sense. And I'm like, well,
mm,
just because this is a situation that probably needed to happen and is very common,
mm,
it can make a little one feel very unsafe and can contribute to, I think, the behavior and the screaming. It makes
mm.
perfect sense for me looking on the, from the outside looking in.
Yeah.
um and it makes you kind of think like how many other things does the
Mm.
society, and I'm assuming you grew up in the States, obviously, and
Yes.
now you're up
Yeah.
in Canada.
Yeah.
um in the States, how many things do we normalize, like in our medical system, that cause people trauma that they may not
Mm.
understand? They're carrying these things around, right?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, it
Yeah.
starts so early. Like it can
Yes.
start with birth. I mean, for
Yes.
one, it can start with the mother's environment while the baby is growing, right? What is happening in mama? What's going on with her stress chemistry as baby is
Yes.
forming? Because your fetus is exposed to all the same chemistry, right? That you have
Yes.
running in your system. So it can start as early as in the womb, with just the mother not getting the support she needs to
Mm.
address her stuff. And what is not healed will repeat. So
Yes.
anything in the parents that is not addressed, that will be reflected by the child. um,
Yep.
and I know as a parent myself how triggering that can be, because what
Yes.
they will do is reflect back to you the exact things that are unresolved in you, usually from the same age. So
Mm-hmm.
it all may be well until they get into the twos, and then that's where you started getting a lot of misattunement or neglect or judgment from your parents, because you started asserting your identity right at around age
Mm-hmm.
2. And so then that's in you, and your kid starts asserting their identity, and then that pokes on your wounds, and then you get reactive, and then that creates more unsafety for them. And this is how the cycle repeats and repeats, is because parents have to look at their own wounds in order to not, experience that reflection with their kids. And then, on top of that kind of stuff, you have things like birth that can be very difficult. The way that the Western medical system approaches birth is insane. I mean, just the position they want the woman to be in, like on her back, like that's not
trapped in a bed,
like medicated, not feeling the experience, or C-section. I understand some of these things are necessary sometimes, but a lot of it can be avoided if you have an actual correct understanding going into the process of what the human being actually needs.
Exactly.
Right?
I think women we're so scared, just like so many other things in our society. We're like, birth is scary. Having a baby is scary. You have to just trust the doctors, the doctors. And that, I did that with my daughter, and it was horrible. It was not comfortable. I was trapped in a bed, medicated. I didn't get the epidural. I had Pitocin. So no epidural, no pain medication, just the medication that brings on a ton of pain, and they wouldn't let me get out of the bed. And I didn't know that I could just say no, like you don't think you can just say no to things, because it's so ingrained in us. But
yes, absolutely. So that birth trauma that happens during birth, if it's traumatic for the mother, if it's then it's going to be traumatic for the baby. That kind of stuff can happen. The way that babies get often taken away from the mother, maybe that's less so now. I know that it's still pretty common. Immediately, the umbilical cord being cut right away
immediately,
right? That is not what you want to do. You want to wait till it stops pulsing, right? Right. So all these things, and then there's other things like, I mean, for me personally as a man, I mean, this is something that's a very touchy topic for many, but circumcision, I mean, that's a polite word for genital mutilation. I mean, let's call it what it is, right? We're mutilating the genitals of infants, often without anesthesia. And they're, this is a wound that not many people will necessarily get to because it's so deeply buried. For myself, it's one that I was managed to heal at least as much as I could after about 8 years of work. I was able to get to that somatic memory of being cut and have a renegotiation and a resolution with that process to the degree that I could. But the thing is, I can never heal it completely because my foreskin's gone, right? Like you don't get that back. And that's something that is such a profound wound. I mean, and the implications, I believe, are vast of circumcision. And if we think about what is happening there, you're cutting off the most sensitive part of the male. It's not the foreskin is not a cover of the penis. It is the tip of the penis. It's the male equivalent of the clitoris. It's the most sensitive, and it's also protective. So you are removing this. It's such a profound wound. Also, there is the fact that a mother should protect her child from this. Right. And so even though there's no cognition online in the baby, what I've discovered in myself is that the physiology has an instinctive knowing all its own that this should not be happening. I was in this safe womb connected to this being who I was, hearing her voice all the time, and everything was safe. And now what has happened, I'm removed from that, and now I'm experiencing this. It's not a cognitive wound, it's a physiological wound and a profound wound to the nervous system, but I think it has implications in the psyche.
All right, I hope that you're enjoying this episode with Seth. Again, a quick little reminder, their 21-day nervous system reset program is going to be on sale this Friday, and you can get $100 off of that using the link in the information section below. Highly recommend those programs. The 21-day program was actually the first one that I tried that introduced me to Irene's work as well as Seth's work. So I hope you're enjoying the episode. Again, some controversial topics. I know I'm going to get some pushback on these. but I really felt like it was time to discuss a lot of these things. So, and I think people are a little bit more open to discussing them as well. If you're finding this conversation helpful, please share it with a friend, with a family member. Make sure to like this video and leave me a comment. And I wanted to thank one more sponsor of today's show. That's going to be Upgraded Formulas. Another thing that I use to keep my nervous system in good shape is mineral balance. And the hair tissue mineral analysis from Upgraded Formulas is a great way to know if your minerals are actually balanced. You can also get a consultation, which I highly, highly recommend, so they can explain this hair tissue mineral analysis to you, tell you perhaps you've been taking too much sodium, too much potassium. Those imbalances can also lead to issues with mental health, with nervous system regulation. If you have too much sodium and not enough potassium, this can actually put your body, your nervous system into fight flight. Believe it or not, this is real stuff about those minerals. So that's why it's important to make sure they're staying balanced. Use my code YOGI12 or YOGI to save on that hair tissue mineral analysis with a consultation. All right, let's go ahead and get back into this conversation with my friend Seth Lyon.
Has implications in the psyche, and that we see playing out all around us in terms of the cycle of violence against women, addiction to pornography, pornography getting more and more and more and more violent as we've gone along. Like when I was a kid, it was relatively innocuous compared to what is available everywhere online now.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
Yeah.
So it's part and parcel of a cycle of this toxic masculine kind of violence against women, brutality and sexuality that we see expressed so many ways around us. I think circumcision is a big part of that. Also, I think it can really disconnect a man from his power. That we don't see a lot of powerful men sort of full of purpose and confidence without hubris, and that's not coming from a place of overcompensation but rather confidence. That's kind of a rare breed. Like, at least when I in America and Canada, when I see other men and meet other men, very often there is either a disconnection from their masculine power or an overcompensation into that, right? Where it's too much, it's disconnected from the feminine, or it's too much into the feminine. And I think a lot of that can also have to do with these wounds of circumcision. So I think it's a very wide-ranging effect that happens from that early experience.
Yeah, and it's such a sensitive topic. I mean, and like you said, I don't think a lot of men realize that it was a traumatic thing for them. And I'm a woman, so it's like, what authority do I have to speak on this? It's not something that I experienced or went through, but now I'm any day now giving birth to a son. And so that's when it came onto my radar. And at first, I found it was a boy. I was like, well, that's something that we'll just do. It's just a normal thing. Everyone does it. And then I kind of stopped and started learning more, learning more about, okay, wow, I don't want to go to a regular hospital. Okay. I want to go somewhere where I could do a natural water birth, where they're not going to push interventions, where they're not going to take my baby away, where they're not going to do, like I have a doula, I have a husband that we've got a plan, and we're going to a low intervention center. I would love to do it here, but as I have to do a little bit of what my husband is comfortable with. I can't just be totally my show, because it's his kid too. But when I started diving into this topic and listening to some stories like yours of men saying that this was, that they were traumatized by this, or different doctors talking about the fact that men that have been circumcised, when they walk into a hospital, their nervous system shuts down completely because of that trauma. And they don't even realize it. I was listening to this midwife, and she said, when a man is walking into a hospital with a woman about to give birth, half the time, if not more, the man totally shuts down, is completely unavailable, because he doesn't realize that he has been through this trauma, and that it is still affecting him, even though it's been 30 years or however long. It's a real thing. And so and then you get the pushback from the medical side of like, it's not hygienic.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
going,
The way
they're gonna,
nature designed us is not hygienic and a problem.
right. I know. And it was
Yeah.
hard that
Yeah.
I kind of had to have this conversation with my husband, because he was like, well, he's going to get made fun of. You know, other kids are going to look at him like he's different. I don't want that for my kid. And I'm like, I just can't see that as a reason to
No.
do that to a baby, because they don't put them to sleep. They're wide
No.
awake. They're on a
Yeah.
little board,
Yeah.
you know, and totally awake for the whole thing.
Yeah.
Separated.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
within hours, if not on the same day of
Oh, yeah.
birth.
Oh, yeah.
And
Often without even a local anesthetic. I mean,
right.
yeah. Yeah.
And my there's excuse me, there's OBs at the practice I go to. It's mostly midwives, but there's some OBs. I had to see an OB last week, and she said, oh, are you going to circumcise the baby? And I was like, no. And she's like, oh, because she knows I don't really eat a lot of sugar. And so she's like, well, I always give the babies a little bit of sugar before I circumcise them. And I was like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that whole thing.
Yeah.
And I don't see how that's like helpful.
I'm not sure what that's going to do. Yeah.
I'm gonna like cut off a body part and give you
Yeah.
sugar, and
Yeah.
it'll be
Yeah.
okay.
That might make a
She's like,
lovely association for addiction later on.
there you right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're just, you know, and it's one of those things. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of pushback on this episode from people who are like, stay in your lane, and you know, this is a taboo topic, you've gone too far, blah blah blah. But
Yeah.
I think we have to talk about things like this.
We
We really do, especially when we have a new generation coming up. And the thing is, I think the rate now of people deciding not to go through with circumcision is about 38%.
Yeah, it's increased a lot over the years as
Yeah.
awareness has grown about this. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it is important that we put that out there, because if I had had this baby 10 years ago, I probably just would have said, okay, sure.
Yeah.
You know, pass him through, just do it. But now, you know, having gone through Smart Body, Smart Mind, having just done the work that I've done on my nervous system, and realized, you know, babies remember things. You know,
Yeah.
we hold memories as somatic. It's in the
Yes.
body.
The
And
body
so,
remembers everything. That's one of the main
yeah.
experiences for, you know, the doctor you'll get from the doctor is, oh, they won't remember it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
body remembers everything all the way back to the
Yeah.
womb. I mean, you
Yeah.
can, and you know, and I've been doing this work for long enough now that I've contacted those felt sense memories, and it's a real thing, you know. So I
Yeah.
mean, if anyone, you know, if you do get pushback, and it's, you know, it's like, well, you know, this is my lane, you know. So, you know,
Yeah, I'm about to have a son.
you know,
I'm responsible
yeah,
for a human, and
yeah.
I'm probably going to say something to traumatize him at some point, or
Oh,
do something.
I doubt it. I doubt it. You're pretty in tune. You know, here's the thing.
I really try my best.
Yeah. Well, and it's important to understand that stress is not the same as trauma too, right? Like trauma is
Yeah.
a specific thing. We're all going to experience stressful situations. There's going to be conflict in families. Always there's going to be something that will come up. You know, we're human beings with different values and different personalities and different trajectories through life. So there's always going to be, you know, stress and conflict in life, but that's not the same as trauma. Trauma is
Right.
a specific thing. Right. And so it's, yeah, I wouldn't worry too much. You're pretty darn in tune. Yeah.
I am really doing my best. I really don't want to intentionally traumatize a child, but you know, I was just getting back to the topic, you know, how can people move through these types of things, and do you think men are coming to the conclusion that this is even, I don't even think it's on people's radar. Do you?
No, not for a big degree, no. And you know,
Yeah.
it's not something like you have to do a lot of work to get to the point to really have a felt sense of how this has affected you. It's a very deeply buried wound. So, you know, there may be many people who will never have that understanding or experience of being affected by it. But I would ask, like, well, what's your sex like? Do you have to move like physically very fast and rough in order to have an orgasm? Do you need a lot of stimulation? That's the result of circumcision, of not having your foreskin.
Ah,
Right?
wow.
When you have a
Okay.
foreskin, you're far more sensitive, just physically, not to mention the deadening that happens because of the trauma. Physically, the apparatus, the penis itself, is much more sensitive when it has that foreskin. Like I said, it's like the male equivalent of the clitoris. Without
Wow.
that, you have to move in a much more forceful, kind of hard, violent way to get enough stimulation to have the orgasm. Now, that can be repaired. One of the big parts of the healing that I did, as well as addressing the traumatic wounds, the nervous system wounds, part of addressing the physical wounds, because I had porn addiction, I had sex addiction. These were
Wow.
all manifestations that by the time I was in middle school, I was basically addicted to porn. And
Wow.
that was in part a compensatory experience, right? Like, for one, it was like a sexual experience that I could totally control. I was in control.
Mm.
That's a very big part of, when we're in trauma, we need to be in control of the
Yes.
situation, right?
Yes.
Feeling out of control or vulnerable can be very difficult. I was able to stop the tape or fast forward it or pause it, right? I could completely manipulate the situation. That is all a traumatic response. And again, probably considered pretty normal.
Yep.
Right? That probably happens a lot.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of lack of sensitivity, but there's also the lack of physical sensitivity that can be repaired to some degree by doing various forms of sexual healing practices like Tantra is sort of the Indian tradition,
Mm-hmm.
right? I identified
Yep.
much more with sort of like the Chinese practices, like Mantak Chia. He's got a couple great books on healing, healing through the Tao. That
Mm.
essentially
Okay.
that it's all about learning to cultivate greater sensitivity through specific sexual practices, working with your energy on your own in different
Mm.
ways. So you can facilitate a great reclamation of sensitivity that way, as
Mm.
well as through healing the traumatic wounds itself. But yeah, that can take time.
Yeah.
Other implications, this just for myself and that I see in a lot of men, are chronically tight hips. If you think about what would
Ah.
happen if, in the physiology of the baby, it's going to be trying to pull away from the threat that's happening in the
Yes.
groin, right? And that gets stuck. That's what's called an incomplete procedural memory, because the baby doesn't have the musculature to escape, but the nervous system will be sending the instructions to escape. So there'll be these
Mm.
unresolved instructions to pull away and pull up through the pelvic floor. And that what I see all over is chronically tight hips in men.
Wow.
So yeah.
I wonder if that can attribute to back problems
Oh, of
also,
course. Oh yeah, if your
Yeah.
pelvic floor is constantly constricting and your hips are tight, that's not going to enable mobility through the lower back, and that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Which is
Interesting. Yeah, I know.
another thing I had was chronic back problems. Yeah, I forgot to mention that.
Really.
Oh yeah, well, I had huge kyphosis in my spine. Like I couldn't touch my toes. I mean, I was, yeah, my back was really messed up chronically, which was another thing that I resolved. So yeah.
Wow. And you resolve that through the trauma healing work,
Through a
correct?
combination of trauma healing work, myofascial work, like
Mm.
things like Rolfing, deep, they're get into working with the deep fascial structures. But
Mm-hmm.
that is not enough on its own. You also have to do the trauma healing work, because when you
Yes.
go into body work like that without an understanding of trauma work, you can get blown out of the water.
Mm.
So it's really important to understand that all those things that open up through physical manipulation will usually have an emotional component that
Right.
you need to have the freedom within yourself to express, and have a good enough relationship with your practitioner that you can express, right? So, you may be that like sobs or fear or tears, anger, that these things will come through in a bodywork session. So, but it is a very powerful combo, this nervous system based trauma healing with really good body work. That's a huge part of fixing the physical manifestations of trauma, I think, is having those good sort of combinations of interventions.
Yeah.
Osteopathic work, acupuncture.
Mm-hmm.
There's many, this is just regular massage. There's many things that can be very helpful, but you need the nervous system piece and the understanding about how the body stores emotion in these places that are chronically tight. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's gut issues, back issue. I mean, so many things. They just take it as normal of getting
Yeah.
older, or that's just how my body is built, and we
Yes.
don't
Yeah.
connect it to these earlier traumas that we normalize it,
Hmm.
and it's pretty funny. My husband listens to a lot of podcasts, and I know Gabor Mate is kind of making the rounds right now with his new book. And so I've been talking about Gabor Mate for years, like years. I read all the books and everything. And now he's like, oh, have you heard this? And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, a little bit. Um, so I think, what I'm trying to get is I think people are a lot more open at this point to listen to those things.
Yeah.
Because we're at a place in society where we have to wake up, we
Hmm.
have to start taking care of ourselves and our children and future generations. We're not in a great place right now with society, and you
Hmm.
can either just kind of get yourself sucked, turn it all off, shut it all down, get sucked into that abyss, or you can begin to wake up and start to heal yourself,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
I'm a believer that you can, um
Absolutely.
having, yeah, so yeah, it's pretty remarkable once you start to do that sort of work of what you can actually accomplish.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that it is becoming more and more clear, the ramifications of unresolved trauma. I mean, they are busting out for all to see. From
Mm,
my main perspective is a shamanistic perspective. I mean, that's something
mm,
that has stayed with me through my early spiritual development, which essentially means that I get my main source of information directly from relating to the earth herself, right? And her
mm,
plants and her creatures, right? The wind,
yeah.
the sun, the clouds, with the weather, all this stuff, right? That's the shaman has a relationship directly with nature. And what she tells me is that her time is coming, and the
Mm,
time of the divine feminine, of feeling people, right? Of sensitive people, of people who are interested of being of service to one another and to healing their wounds. I think that that's just the trajectory we're on. And that's a bit more esoteric of a perspective, I know. Hopefully your audience is okay with that. But that's just,
if they've gotten this far in the interview, then probably.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's just what I see, and what I see all around is that the trend towards healing is getting more and more and more obvious. Right now, that looks destructive, right? This is one of the
Hmm.
right because we're seeing the wounds so much more. Like, it's stuff that has maybe been people haven't been aware of on many levels
Mm,
is coming more to the surface, both personally in our society, around the world in our cultures. That which has been unresolved and wounded is becoming more visible. So I think that is a momentum that we're on, and you kind of can get on that train and have
hmm.
really great healing experiences, or you can totally turn away from it and shut down. And I think that if that happens, then people will get sicker, faster,
Hmm.
because we do seem to have reached sort of a dividing point where it's like, okay, let's do the work, or you got to go someplace else.
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I think, from the work I've been doing just with like kind of quantum healing, circadian rhythms, I
yeah,
think people are really open to this connection with the earth, that they know, that their bodies know that that is where they need to go, that that's what needs to happen, that there isn't a medication, there
yeah.
isn't necessarily even a supplement, even though there could be some that might help a little bit, but
Hmm.
there isn't a necessarily like a quick, easy solution to getting through these things, that wisdom is there. We have to stop shutting it down and turning it off. So I think that's
Yeah,
an important conversation to have for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's just so much natural resource available to us.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a place for pharmaceuticals, there's a place for supplements.
Sure.
If someone is in a place where they need something to really manage the symptoms that are really extreme, until they can sort of get underneath them with deeper work, that's fine.
Right.
Um, So, but really we got to do that core deep nervous system based trauma healing work, and we need to be in nature. We need to,
Yes.
the work that you're doing is so important with circadian rhythms and exposure to sunlight and natural light. It's such a huge part of our healing. I mean, we are
Yes.
not that different from plants in terms of what
No.
we need, right? Like
No, we're really not.
we're organisms, and so we respond well to the natural environment because that is us. We are that. We are nature. So
Right.
yeah, it's very important part of healing is to understand that connection with the earth herself. Yeah.
Absolutely. And how I've talked with Irene about this, but are you guys starting to see more men coming to
Yep.
some of your programs? Yeah,
Thankfully,
that's really good.
yes. Yeah. Historically,
Yeah.
with all sorts of healing, it's been about 95% women, it seems like. And
Yeah.
that is slowly starting to change. We're starting to see more men coming in, and that's really great.
That's really good. Yeah, because I think we all need to heal. Not just the women or the women pushing the men into the healing.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
like we all need to get there. And I think men are the ones that sometimes need it even more than the women,
Oh yeah.
just some of the things that we've spoken about today. This like have a stiff upper lip and be the man and take care of
Yeah.
the household. And, then I feel like the men are the ones that have some of the health problems where they just drop dead,
Mhm. Mhm.
um,
Well,
because
yeah,
they've,
the
yeah,
emotion is when you internalize and don't express your emotion and it's all stuck, you're not just suppressing your emotions, you're suppressing your entire system. There's
yeah,
no difference. Suppressing the emotions is suppressing the immune system. It's
yeah,
all one system. So
yeah,
yeah, over time, yeah, it'll take heart attacks, strokes, these types of things so often ultimately stem from all that is repressed inside. Cancers,
yeah,
all of these,
yes,
right? They stem from what is repressed in the system such that it can't function optimally. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. What do you think is the best way to, I guess, kind of continue to make this information more available and make men a little more comfortable with maybe even having these conversations or being okay with some of this work from a male point of view?
Well, gosh, it's a good question. I mean, I think we
Yeah,
got to keep talking about it. I mean, hopefully more men will talk about their experiences of healing. I
yeah,
think one thing that's very important, perhaps for men to understand, I mean, we get so much imprinting around, being, strong and,
hmm,
and just really you need to understand that that's not strength in the way that it's being communicated most of the time. It's actually a brittleness. Like
yeah,
it's a rigidity that makes one brittle rather than flexible. And that's not strength. Real strength and courage means turning your attention to the inside. To
yeah,
be vulnerable is to be courageous, right? So
yeah,
perhaps some reframing of what it means to be a courageous man is
mm,
necessary in our
yeah,
society, because the current models that sort of come out of what we inherited from Victorian era down through the 50s, that whole sensibility of upright, strong man sort of is there's many problems with that that need to be looked at,
yeah,
because yes, we do need to be connected to our masculinity and our strength, um, but we also need to be vulnerable and connected to our softer side to be a whole person.
yes,
And that takes courage. It takes courage to be vulnerable. It takes courage to look at yourself, to allow things to express that may be scary. Right? So
yeah, I
perhaps
agree.
that would be helpful to, if that can spread a little bit,
I hope so. I know I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
like 30% of my listeners are men, so maybe there'll be some trickle down from the episode. And I know a lot of my female listeners are connected closely with men as well. So hopefully
Mhm.
this will be an episode to just bring some awareness to some things that maybe
Yeah.
I think as a society, just totally sweep under the rug. Um, and an avenue for healing. I still am a huge believer in the program that you and Irene do, the Smart Body, Smart Mind, and even the 21-day nervous system healing. I think
Yeah.
if more people would be open to that sort of work.
Yes, that would be a huge help.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is a very good way to get into it. I mean, the 21-day nervous system tune-up.
That's what I did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the doorway in, because it's available all the time. It
Yeah.
doesn't cost too much. It's about the cost of 2 good therapy sessions,
Right.
and it gives you tools for life and knowledge that's incredibly important. So
Yeah.
I think that's a very good way in. If people are keen and sort of their interest is sparked up by this conversation, I would say check
Yeah.
out that.
Yeah.
Or you can look for a practitioner in your area. You can look for a somatic experiencing practitioner. The one caveat I'll say with that is that the amount of good somatic experiencing practitioners in
Yeah.
relation to the amount of need is
Yeah.
very, very, very small. There
Yeah.
aren't that many to begin with. And of the ones that are there, not all of them really understand what they're doing. It's a very intricate form of work that takes a level of internal awareness that not everyone understands to be important as part of it. So of the practitioners that I've seen, there's some amazing great ones out there, and there's also many that don't really know what they're doing. And
Right.
that's one of the reasons we encourage people to do something like the 21-day nervous system tune-up first, is because then you get like a baseline knowledge of, okay,
Hmm.
I understand myself, I understand my system, I understand the theory behind this work, I'm starting to do some of the practices. That makes a person way, way more informed about what to look for in a private practitioner, which is
Yeah.
also really helpful. Like if you can find one-on-one work, that's great as well. But it can be good to have a little baseline first, so you know what you're looking for in the first place. So, oh, it looks like your picture froze up for a
I
second.
agree. I think, oh, am I still there?
There you
We
are.
good?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
you're good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting me here. And I just wanted to add, I think that kind of going through that program, it'll offer your nervous system some stability, so you can, I think, make better choices also about the people you choose to work with and things like that. So I highly
Mhm.
recommend it for anybody. Yeah,
Yeah, for
absolutely.
sure. For sure. Yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been awesome chat. Thank you so much for coming in. And, people, I'll put all the links to the things we just talked about below. Is there any other way, if people kind of want to follow your work, is there any other
Mm.
way they should look for you other than those links?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, I can't offer anyone private sessions at this point because I'm totally full with a long wait list. But if you want to read some of my work, I've got quite a few articles on my website, sethlyon.com. There's also a link there to a sound healing album that I made to support nervous system health. So I'm a musician, composer, multi-instrumentalist. Before I got into nervous system work and healing, that's what I did, was music.
Wow.
That's there. Irene's website, she's got tremendous amount of great blogs. Her YouTube channel,
Oh
for those
yeah.
who like videos, Irene's YouTube channel is a tremendous resource to learn more about this stuff. We've got some interviews together on there that people can check out. We did one recently on parenting, which
Oh,
was pretty
nice.
great. It's been really good. People have been enjoying that one and getting a lot from it. So yeah, go to YouTube, Irene Lyon. Check out sethlyon.com or irenelyon.com. 21-day nervous system tune-up, all that stuff is what I would suggest. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'll link all that below. And again, thank you for this conversation. I think it's going to help a lot of people and maybe open some doors for people where things have previously been shut. So
I hope so. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I hope so too. Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sarah.